Yo, so what just happened? Skara who? Scaramouche is now wandering the world that has forgotten him, which we learn more about in some neat abyssal Conrian lore drops, and some more explanations about how Irminsul affects the world of Tevat. So, I'll be going over my thoughts and review on the Archon Interlude Chapter, Act 3, Inversion of Genesis, as well as some analysis on the character of Scaramouche, now called Wanderer, or whatever you like. I think the title, Inversion of Genesis, essentially just summarizes how Scaramouche attempted to invert, or reverse, his own creation and existence. We start off going back to Nahida for more information on our twin. I'm glad that we're being more active about getting the current Archon's help for information, because that was the whole point of why we're traveling through these 7 nations, to ask the Archons for clues on what happened to us and our sibling. Granted, Nahida is the one who offered to help us find more information via Irminsul, but I'm glad we're getting more help from Sumeru's Archon instead of how it was in previous nations where the Archons mainly said, not sure, try going to the next nation. The main way Nahida suggests helping us find information is through a deal she makes with Scaramouche. He will help us investigate Irminsul for any information on our siblings, since he still maintains a connection with it from his attempted ascent to godhood. And in return, I believe she'll help him get back on his feet now that he's been abandoned by the Fatui and is all alone, something he's very familiar with. Again, Nahida is being a real MVP again because not only is she still taking an active role in our journey, but also it does feel like she has empathy for Scaramouche and helps out of the goodness of her heart. We enter Irminsul with Scaramouche to babysit him as he searches through memories. Right off the bat, the setting reminds me of Mona's domain from the 2.8 Golden Apple Archipelago and the 2.7 Interlude Act 2 in that odd space in the chasm. What I notice and like throughout is the dichotomy of Scaramouche's snarky attitude towards us and his rather charismatic attitude towards Nahida. He recognizes Nahida's godhood but also genuinely understands that she's just trying to help him. And we learn the lore behind the roots of Scaramouche's worldviews and what really made him who he is today, the tragedy at Tatarasuna. Previous apprentices of the Ishin art, such as Niwa, were in charge of maintaining the resources at Tatarasuna. One of his group members, Katsuragi, found Scaramouche at Shake Pavilion and befriended the puppet, treating him like a human. These were his first friends. However, one of the devices they used was supplied by Dottore, disguised as the Fontaine mechanic Escher, and corrupts Tatarasuna's furnaces with malicious energy from crystal marrow. Dottore murders Niwa as well, informing the jester, Piero, that he's completed the task to create an internal gap in Inazuma. I have to question why Piero wanted to do this, why he felt it necessary to disrupt Inazuma. I'm guessing that it was a necessary step to eventually be involved in the Vision Hunt decree? Not 100% sure. I'm a bit conflicted with the Fatui's involvement because I always felt like it was Scaramouche who was behind the incident. But now it just turns out to be a whole Dottore plot, so to me, while it adds even more credibility to Dottore's role as a villain, I can't help but feel like it takes away from Scaramouche, because part of what makes his character arc is all of his past treacheries. He still hurt the Raiden Gokaden later on, but a part of me feels that he also should have sabotaged Tatarasuna as well. Narratively speaking, I think this all still flows fine, but I just personally felt a little underwhelmed. We're back in the present, and he confirms something I had thought in my Act 5 video, which is that our twin is in fact from outside Tevat, and that they first arrived in Conria in Tevat, confirming that yes, Irminsul was manipulated to believe that the twin is falsely from Tevat. It stands to reason that if Irminsul can have information removed from it, information can also be inserted into it. What's interesting then is that Scaramouche learned this from Piero, yet the Fatui does not classify the twin as a descender, so something's awry here. Piero is confirmed Conrian and spent much time with the twin in Conria as a royal mage. I'm questioning why Piero knows that the sibling is from outside Tevat, yet the Fatui do not classify them as a descender. Also, I think that maybe Irminsul started recording the siblings' movements precisely because they arrived in Conria, and likely there are special rules when it comes to Conria. Anyways, back to Scaramouche. What I do like is how Scaramouche takes in the truth of the matter. He's received a lot of humanization from all of his flashbacks and recent teaser footage, a lot of what made him villainous was his incorrect interpretation of betrayal. His constant betrayals always led to loneliness, leading to many suicidal thoughts. His character takes many references from the song Bohemian Rhapsody, and one of the lines, "I sometimes wish I had never been born at all," can summarize much of his early life. And so when the traveler heavily implies that it's possible to change the past, it makes sense to me why Scaramouche tries to wish he was never born at all, to try and change the past, believing that if he had never lived, the people he befriended would be given a second chance at life. It's not a healthy ideal, but it makes sense with his character. It's all the regret that pushes him to make a somewhat permanent decision. Let's go through exactly what he tried to do. Similar to Rukkhadevata, Scaramouche wants to erase himself from the world, believing it'll change the past. But as Rukkhadevata stated, one cannot simply erase oneself. And so we see the aftermath of Scaramouche's actions. It's very similar to when Rukkhadevata was erased. Everything is still the same, except that anything involving Scaramouche is now remembered for a different reason. So, canonically speaking, the past did not change. We, as the audience alongside Traveler, understand this, and it's that history is sort of remembered differently in Teyvat. As an analogy, it's basically like everyone in Teyvat pretty much said, let's just pretend we don't know who Scaramouche is, and anything he caused, we'll come up with a different reason. Oh, he was the 6th Harbinger? Let's just say that the 6th seat was always empty. Oh, he retrieved the Electro-Gnosis from Inazuma? Let's just say that Signora retrieved it instead. So, the main difference between what happened to Rukkhadevata versus Scaramouche is that, unlike Rukkhadevata, Scaramouche still has a form of presence today. Nahida erased Rukkhadevata, removing her from Irminsul entirely, and so no traces of her remain today. That's why Forbidden Knowledge and Elazar are gone, because the only thing keeping them in this world was Rukkhadevata. Whereas with Scaramouche, his attempt to erase himself still left him with a trace today, and that trace is the Wanderer. Nahida is definitely the most big-brain Archon. She developed a failsafe against Scaramouche's actions by storing an allegory related to Scaramouche's story, and since it's not directly referencing Scaramouche, it wasn't affected by the Irminsul change, which lets her indirectly remember Scaramouche's story. As a side note, while I'm happy that Traveler told Nahida about them remembering everything, the story keeps reminding us about how they won't talk about Rukkhadevata, so this gives more suggestion that Traveler will one day spill the beans about Rukkhadevata. We meet the Wanderer in the Grand Bazaar. To clarify, the Wanderer is still Scaramouche, but just without the memories. Like Nahida explains, Wanderer is a reincarnation. So, here we come into the main crux of the quest, how Scaramouche, as the Wanderer, accepts his past. I think a reason for him accepting the past here is because he's more accepting that he's a puppet, with nothing to lose. Whereas Scaramouche from before was so obsessed with godhood and neglecting his past that he could not bear to face it again. I feel that that's why when we defeated him, he was begging Nahida to let him keep the Gnosis, because he would do anything to avoid going back to his inferior life. So in a way, his erasing attempt unironically helped his current self to accept the past from a blank canvas point of view. There's some cool lore here that I'd like to highlight real quick. As we know, Piero recruited Scaramouche and frequently sent him into the Abyss for unknown tasks. So I wonder if Scaramouche was sent instead of others because of his puppet nature, where any negative side effects from the Abyss will affect him less, like maybe Forbidden Knowledge. Two things that come to mind for what he was doing in the Abyss could either be gathering intel on our twin, or just trying to utilize and gather any resources to use from the Abyss. I think both could be possible. This could also be related to why back in 1.1's Unreconciled Stars event, Piero wanted Scaramouche specifically to see that the stars are fake. Another point is that Scaramouche and Signora didn't get along very well at all, and that makes me more convinced that likely none of the Harbingers like each other at all, which is kind of sad? I thought maybe Child and Pulcinella may have a healthy relationship somewhat, but Wanderer kind of debunks this in one of his voice lines highlighting Pulcinella's shadiness. Also, we see a flashback that Dottore and Scaramouche were in cahoots with each other, but not really on friendly terms per se. So, this makes me wonder if the other Harbingers were even aware of this partnership, given how since we last saw them, they still noted the Electronosis being gone and Scaramouche nowhere to be found. So yeah, back to Wanderer. We see more of his humanization where he recognizes that the past is what shapes humans, and so by accepting his past memories, he becomes more human, and Nahida, likely confident in his resolve, returns his memories to him. In the cutscene that follows, it shows some internal conflict with his regained memories. I interpret both the Shoki no Kami and the old Scaramouche as forces that are reluctant with Wanderer's acceptance. Scaramouche was misguided, and Wanderer looks to correct that misguided path, and this is acknowledged by the gods, where Wanderer receives an animal vision, a way that symbolizes him breaking free of the shackles of the past, and he brings the old Shoki no Kami down. I also really liked his small discussions with Nahida where it highlights that while he's accepted his past, there's still a lot to learn. For example, that human relationships aren't just simply giving and taking. Sometimes we just help for the sake of helping. And that our imperfections are what make us human. What Nahida says about our past being a tiny fraction of our lives is pretty relatable to real life as well. When we experience bad things, it can feel the worst in the moment. But as time goes on and we keep moving forward, that experience becomes less and less heavy on us since it just keeps becoming a smaller and smaller fraction of our past. The less it defines us as a person. So yeah, shoutouts to the God of Wisdom, Lord Kusanali. I do want to take some time here and express some of the issues I have with Scaramouche's character development. I recognize that he did have a change of heart, no pun intended. Prior to this, he was a cynical and snarky harbinger with malicious intent and a twisted view of the world. But now he's more settled, more understanding of the world, and looks to find his own destiny wandering Teyvat. Now, he still maintains his arrogance and high sense of stature, which I'm fine with, and even like about his character. So, he had clear development, he was on one side of a spectrum, and is now on another side. Cool. The main issue that I have about the character arc is how we got to it. He does still have the right mindset to accept the past, be held accountable for his actions, accept any punishment for his past actions, and to keep moving forward. But at the end of the day, the people that took issue with what he caused ultimately do not remember what happened. Teyvat does not remember that Scaramouche was responsible for the Raiden Gokuden incident, where he did horrible things that negatively impacted the descendants of the Ishin art, most notably Kazuha and the Kamisato siblings Ayaka and Ayato. In the version 2.6 Irodori Festival, where we were alluded to Scaramouche's involvement in the Raiden Gokuden downfall through both Albedo's painting of the Five Kasen and Kaedehara Yoshinori's letter, Ayato told us specifically that an eventual confrontation with Scaramouche will happen soon, which I thought would involve Kazuha. In fact, I was looking forward to how Kazuha and the others would confront Scaramouche over what happened to the Gokuden. But now, because no one remembers Scaramouche, there isn't as much impact to future interactions between the parties. Scaramouche does tell us that, hey, feel free to let Inazuma know that he sabotaged the Gokuden, and while I like that he's accepting the responsibility, I am not as much of a fan of the narrative aspect of it, because even if, let's say, Wanderer comes face to face with Kazuha, we'd still have to explain who Scaramouche was, and that kind of just adds a bit of overload to the situation. It's the same thing with A. What A did with abandoning the puppet that had life is arguably quite a bad thing, and her abandonment of Scaramouche did negatively impact Scaramouche's upbringing, which arguably also led into his future malicious actions. I think for A to really understand the negative implications of her choice, she has to really see the results of what she did. But because Scaramouche isn't remembered, A won't see just how much of an impact she had. One of the impact is that because A created the puppet, it was then used by Dottore, which became the basis for how he created his own segments, which does cause havoc around Teyvat. Now, we know that Nahida has access to Scaramouche's memories, so really, if the writers wanted to, they can always have Nahida just give the Scaramouche memories to anyone relevant, and then have them interact with Wanderer. But in that case, I question why we needed to have Scaramouche be forgotten about in the first place. What narrative value did the writers see in this approach? I guess they wanted to demonstrate Scaramouche's conviction, how much he was willing to gamble to change the past, which, sure, that sounds fine, but I don't think they had to have had the memories be altered. Scaramouche could have gone through this similar character arc without erasing himself. It just feels that Wanderer has less stakes now because no one remembers Scaramouche. For example, there's no real danger from the Fatui because they don't know he exists. Okay, maybe Piero still knows, but my main point is that the erasure undermines the potential consequences of his past actions. This isn't the biggest deal, but I don't want to see more stories in the future that undermine actions via Irminsul magic manipulation. And one final note, thank goodness Nahida is such a kind god like A mentions, because oh boy, she could just literally erase anyone from Irminsul if she wanted to. Lastly, we get a small conversation with a mysterious voice who emphasizes that fate cannot be changed. What has happened cannot change. Maybe gods can change things a little bit, but ultimately one's fate is set in stone. I don't have much interpretation to go off of here, but I can only assume this voice belongs to the high order powers of Teyvat, maybe someone like Istaroth or the primordial one. I think the main message for the traveler is that really anything could happen for reasons out of our comprehension, and that despite that, we need to accept it and continue on our journey. And speaking of which, I just wanted to say that Zhongli likely knows more than he lets on. We know he's under a contract to not disclose what happened in Conria, but if we look back at his first story quest, the last part, aptly named A Record of All Things, where he comments that the traveler crosses celestial worlds and can act as a relayer of information, a bookkeeper of sorts, a witness to the events in Teyvat. He's aware of worlds beyond Teyvat, and that history can be rewritten. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's perhaps a descender himself, one that still remembers Ruka Devata. So yeah, this was the story of how Scaramouche became the Wanderer. I'm curious to see how he'll be referred to by most players in the future, whether it be as Scaramouche or Wanderer, or maybe someone's custom name turns out to be so popular that catches on. I didn't really know what name to give him myself, but on the spot I just went with Shingeki, referencing Shingeki no Kyojin, Attack on Titan, because this quest left me feeling that Wanderer's going to keep on moving forward no matter what. Maybe until his enemy Dotori is finished off or something. Which reminds me of Eren and the themes of pushing forward that Attack on Titan has. Maybe I'll change it in the future if I think of something better. Regardless of what it will be called, I think interesting plot points that can come up is how he gets involved with the Fatui again. Namely, he's made it clear that he wants revenge against Dotori. There's the 6th Harbinger seat being empty, which could give an opportunity for Hoyoverse to introduce a new character that takes that spot. Wanderer also has a lot of lore he can elaborate on, such as the fake stars and maybe some secrets he saw in the abyss. He's still not 100% friendly with the Traveler either. They're not friends, they're more like acquaintances similar to a child, and Wanderer will help out where he can. So yeah, overall I enjoyed this interlude quest. I'm relatively fine with how his character evolved, but I hope we don't see too much repetition of Irminsul magic memory manipulation. Anyways, I'm gonna go wander about in the stories of other characters, and I'll be back with more videos, so feel free to subscribe if you'd like. And yep, as always, thank you for watching this video, and till next time, take care.